we were thinking about kind of this month and who we wanted to invite, we thought to invite Rabbi Deborah Blausten. Rabbi Deborah was introduced to me through a friend, and we started talking about what ways of moving through the world did you inherit. And through our chat, I was fascinated by her day-to-day and what that work looks like and how she brings people together and how she carries on with this ethos. Rabbi Deborah has a phenomenal story, so without further ado, over to Rabbi Deborah.
Thanks. It's really nice to be here. Hi, I'm Deborah, and when Al said to me, what ways of moving through the world did you inherit? It made me think about what does it mean to be both an individual and somebody who carries this strange title. I'm just a person, we're all just people. And yet, by virtue of the roles we play in the world and by virtue of the stories and the traditions we inherit, we also bring with us other identities. I'm just a person. I have a cat, I have a husband, I have a sibling, I have a family, I like shoes, I'm quite messy, I like technology. I'm a person, we all are. And yet I'm also a rabbi. I do this job that's existed for over 2,000 years and has been done by women for less than 50. And I sit in this weird space of old and new. And when Al said to me, let's think about ethos and the traditions that you inherit, for me, what feels most interesting and what opens up conversation is to talk about the transition that I inherit, what you might call the ethos of the Beit Midrash, the place of learning and of expounding. So I thought rather than talking this morning, instead we'd learn together. We'd do something that enables us to hear each other's voices and to experience something together that perhaps will give you a flavor of that ethos in a different way. So let's see if I can figure out which part. There we go. So the Beit Midrash, the house of study, is I feel like we're in one. It's the study hall. It's the beehive of what you might call rabbinic Judaism. I'm going to just add a disclaimer that I realize I stand here with this kind of identity as like religious person, but I think you should know that Judaism is not an evangelizing tradition. No one here is trying to make you think anything. In fact, the most Jewish thing you could do is disagree with me. So just have that in mind as we have this conversation. But the ethos of the Beit Midrash, the culture of the house of study, and how a culture of learning has allowed a people to adapt over thousands of years of displacement and across continents, that if we can experience some of that dialogue today, experience our own moments of kind of intercultural, intercontinental conversation, that we might pick up and recreate the ethos of the Beit Midrash. So what you're seeing behind me are 4 different images of different Batei Midrash. A kind of what I would say is quite a stereotypical image. This image comes from Yemen, and it's two men on one side and another partner on the other, all studying a text. And I've brought my own here for you because you can see that there is a commonality in all of these photos, whether you're a young baby with your first moments of learning, whether you're at the real dawn of the age of photography in Yemen, whether you're an American grandfather and granddaughter studying together, or whether you're in one of these kind of new intergenerational, intergender spaces studying, we're constantly picking up threads of dialogue. And the Beit Midrash, one thing you should know about the Beit Midrash is it's a study space, but it's not a quiet space. Jews are really bad at libraries because they require quiet. And study is not quiet. Study that's quiet is scary, because a study that's quiet are ideas that don't live in the world and don't come into dialogue with others. So what I wanted to do is to introduce you to what I think is quite a fascinating endeavor, and to meet it, to understand a bit about how it works, and then to throw ourselves into it. And what I want to introduce you to is called the Talmud. So the book that I've got in my hand is a folio, is a volume of Talmud. And there's also one on the screen behind you. There are 63 of these. Each one of these is double-sided. Each page is double-sided. Each folio is a tractate, if you like. It's a record of a rabbinic discourse. And this chain of tradition begins in around the year 0, but really comes to life in two moments. One, in the aftermath of the Babylonian invasion of and destruction of the first temple in Jerusalem in the year 586, when the temple that was the center of religious life in Jerusalem was destroyed. Up to then, the way that people engaged with, we call it religion in the modern day, but religion didn't really exist 2,000 years ago. It really was kind of cultic practice. The way people engaged with their images and ideas of God and with the structures of their faith was through sacrifices that they took to the temple. And once there was no temple, there was no method for sacrifice. And people had to figure out how to be a community without the hub of community. The exile after the destruction of the first temple didn't last very long. But in the year 70, the Romans laid siege to the temple in Jerusalem. And eventually the walls of the temple were breached and the community went into exile. And they went into exile in two places. One in the Galilee, in the north of what's now Israel, and the second in Babylonia, which is the land that we now know as Iraq. And in those places, they asked the question, how do we build community, enshrine values, create culture, understand our place in the world, and know what our responsibility is when there is no geographic center or commanded ritual? That when we don't have to do sacrifices anymore, how do we live? And that's the question they're asking. It's an exilic text of how do we create in the absence of what we had. And so what you'll see in the middle of this text, this kind of pink chunk in the middle, is Hansard. For those of you who know the House of Commons, we have a Hansard. It's the person who sits at the front of the House of Commons and records everything that's said in Parliament. This is the equivalent for the Beit Midrash. So this is the voice of somebody who sat in the study hall and listened to everything that everyone said. Rabbi this said this. And in fact, not just that, Rabbi this said this in the name of. One thing that's characteristic of Rabbinic Judaism is citing your sources. That you have more credibility when you cite the person you learned something from than if you don't. So it's not good to just kind of come up with an idea. Your idea has more authority if you say, I learned it from so-and-so who learned it from so-and-so who learned it from so-and-so. And in fact, the more people you can show you've learned from, the higher kind of status your teaching has. So in the middle, you have this record of debates. Those who won the argument and those who lost the argument, both contained in the text. Around them, and so this text in the middle, up to about the year 500 in the Common Era. So the expulsion from Jerusalem was in the year 70. And this process of development of rabbinic texts takes us from the year 70 up to about the year 500, where it started to be written down. But it was an oral tradition. There were people whose job it was to stand in the study hall and to know the whole lot off by heart. It's a great job. I don't think any of our brains could do that anymore. Around this debate in the middle, we then start to see other voices that show us how this text has traveled. So on the inside of every folio of Talmud, so always on the inside strip, we have the voice of Rashi. Rashi, Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, was writing in medieval France in the 11th century. On the outside, we have the Tosophists, who wrote letters to each other over several centuries between houses of study in France and Germany. On the top, or always on the outside of the page, we have essentially, you know, in Wikipedia, when something is blue and it's a hyperlink and it has a number, and if you go down to the bottom, you can see what they're citing. It's exactly what's going on here. So it says Torah or HaShalem. It means the full light of Torah. So that's Torah being the 5 books of Moses, the first 5 books of the Bible, of what you might know as the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible. Every Torah verse referenced here, so for instance, there's a little letter Gimel, like a little letter G there, is backed up there with the full reference. So if someone's quoting something, they might only quote half a verse. But to study it, you need to know the whole thing so that you couldn't be misled. On the inside, you have cross-references to every other similar passage anywhere else in the Talmud. So any discussion of the same text and any reference to the same legal conversations. There we go. Below that, we have 17th to 19th century teaching. Some of that comes from Islamic Spain. Some of that comes from across the late medieval, early modern Europe. Particularly that one, you'll find a lot of Poland and Lithuania. And then up there at the top, you'll find quite often, teachings from Maimonides, who was the court doctor in one of the caliphates in Islamic Spain in the 12th century, who was a mathematician and a legal thinker. And so what you have is a real layering of geography, of teaching, of learning, internally cited, everyone talking to each other, put together in the early 1800s in Lithuania, in Vilna, pre-computer. The whole thing assembled, typeset, organized, referenced. And you can only do that when enough people are enfranchised in the process. You can't do this kind of thing if only one or two people know the information. This kind of organization of information, of passing down of tradition, requires large enfranchisement and shared knowledge. And it, for me, is a good example of how the culture of the Beit Midrash requires creativity to be connected to shared knowledge. That doesn't work if only one person knows. And it's important to know where knowledge comes from so that you can enter the conversation and take it a different way. So how do we study Talmud? How does it work? Well, the most important unit of study is in Hebrew known as a zug, a pair. That all Talmud study begins in partnership. What do? You start by reading. And you read aloud. Why? So that you can hear if someone else trips up on the text. So that you can ask questions aloud as you feel the words on your lips. And so that both of you have access to the same information. If you're reading it in your heads, you're not entirely sure where the other person is. But if one reads aloud to another, then you're automatically in dialogue and you're a spoken voice. It becomes yours the minute you read it out loud. You read it out loud, you discuss it, and you debate it. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to meet one of the most famous study partnerships, one of the most famous zugot in the Talmud. They were a second generation of scholars who were in the Galilee in what's now the north of Israel near Tiberias. And they were one of these famous partnerships, and they have a very particular story that might help us think about what's needed for creative learning together. So I'm going to put my big volume down and bring a translation up, because I think that might be more useful for us. Can I have a microphone? Because we're going to do some reading. So I'll start you off. I'm going to introduce the characters. And then maybe we'll read it together, we'll pick it apart, and then we're going to look at it in pairs. So here's the story. The Gemara relates, the Gemara being that big pink chunk in the middle, the storytelling chunk. One day, Rabbi Yochanan is one of the great scholars. He's beautiful. He's got curly, long, blonde hair, and he was said to sit outside the ritual baths so that when women came out of the ritual bath after they'd gone in to immerse after the end of their period, they'd go home, and that was when you often made a family. They would see him, and they would think he was so beautiful, they would rush home to their husbands. So he's known to be an incredibly beautiful figure. Rabbi Yochanan was bathing in the Jordan River, and this guy, Reish Lakish, saw him, and Reish Lakish jumped into the Jordan, pursuing him. At that time, Reish Lakish was the leader of a band of marauders. So we have rabbi and we have bandit. Rabbi Yochanan said to Reish Lakish, "Your strength is fit for Torah study." Reish Lakish said to him, "Your beauty is fit for women." Very heteronormative text. Rabbi Yochanan said to him, "If you return to the pursuit of Torah, I will give you my sister in marriage who is more beautiful than I am." We've got these two men in the river. Rabbi Yochanan says to him, "You're so strong, you would be amazing at studying Torah." And in return, we have this relationship starting to be built, and Reish Lakish marries Rabbi Yochanan's sister. We don't need to remember that family detail so much, but the key thing is that he's offered two men who don't know each other to learn together. Reish Lakish accepted upon himself to study Torah Subsequently, he wanted to jump back out of the river to bring back his clothes, but he was unable to return as he'd lost his physical strength as soon as he accepted the responsibility to study Torah upon himself. Quite an interesting idea that we might come back to in our conversations about the difference between physical strength and intellectual pursuit. So at the moment that Reish Lakish says, I'm going to study, he loses his physical prowess. Probably some deep commentary somewhere, some deeply internalized self-critique of how if you study all day, you have no strength because you never go outside and you're pale and weak and all those things. But we have two characters, and these are the things you need to know. Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Yochanan, Torah scholar. Reish Lakish, bandit. Let's... I got a volunteer to do a bit of reading. Great. What's your name? Nina, go for it.
Rabbi Yohanan taught Reish Lakish Bible and taught him Mishnah and turned him into a great man. Eventually, Reish Lakish became one of the outstanding Torah scholars of his generation. One day, the sages of the study hall were engaging in a dispute concerning the following baraita, rabbinic teachings debate. With regard to the sword, the knife, the dagger, the spear, and hand sickle, and a harvest sickle, from when are they susceptible to ritual impurity?
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Really well read. So Rabbi Yochanan teaches Reish Lakish, and Reish Lakish becomes a Torah scholar. And they're having a debate. And the debate is, at what point is a metal object finished being made? Because once something's finished, I see it a little bit like if you leave a plate out in the kitchen with dirt, with food on it for a few days, and then you put other food on it, you might get sick from eating off the same plate. That's how they understood purity and impurity. So an object that's been touched by something impure could pass it on. We don't need to worry. They're obsessed with ritual impurity. We don't need to be. What we need to know is they're having a discussion about when a metal object is finished being made. We've got harvest sickle, spear, hand sickle, knife, and dagger. And this is the question that they're studying. I have another reader. Great. What's your name? What?
Omri.
Hi, Omri.
Hi. So the Baraita answers, it is from the time of the completion of their manufacture. These sages inquired, and when is the completion of their manufacture? Rabbi Yochanan says, it is from when one fires these items in the furnace. Reish Lakish said, it is from when one scalds them in water after they've been fired in the furnace. Rabbi Yochanan said to Reish Lakish, a bandit knows about his banditry. You are an expert in weaponry because you were a bandit in your youth.
Okay. Does someone want to summarize what's just happened? Lena, you can take the mic back from Omri if you want.
I see like a recognition of everyone's path.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
I love that. A recognition of everyone's path. So who's bringing what knowledge into this space?
Reish Lakish.
Brilliant. And he knows about what?
About weapons.
About weapons, right? A bandit knows about his banditry, right? A bandit knows about weapons. How do you think Reish Lakish might be feeling right now? Pass it back to Omri.
Furious, I'd imagine.
Tell me why.
Because this man who told him to leave banditry and study Torah is now shaming him for being a bandit.
Okay, let's see what happens. Do you want to pass the mic on to someone near you? Someone near Omri? Anyone? Anyone feel like reading? Oh, read for us.
Reish Lakish said to Rabbi Yohanan, what benefit did you provide me by bringing me close to Torah? There, among the bandits, they called me leader of the bandits, and here, too, they call me leader of the bandits. Rabbi Yohanan said to him, I provided benefit to you as I brought you close to God under the wings of the divine presence. As a result of the quarrel, Rabbi Yohanan was offended, which in turn affected Reish Lakish, who fell ill.
Okay, so we had this beautiful partnership. Something has happened. I want you to turn to the person next to you and try and answer these two questions. Just remember, it needs to be noisy. Matt, nice to meet you. Just going to turn my mic off. Okay, I'm going to stop you because it sounds like there's enough thoughts in the room to join them all together. So I'm wondering if somebody might, let's start over here. Would you let us in on your conversation? Who's feeling chatty? Great, let us in. Do you want to let us in on your conversation?
Well, to me, though, I think he's in big trouble.
Okay, why? I agree. Tell us why you think he's in big trouble. Alkan, go on.
I think it's because he's sort of getting offended that they're assuming he's still, in the banditry world. And so, yeah.
Brilliant, let's pass it back. Birthday girl.
God, I'm gonna die right now. Basically, we were just saying that, he is on this path towards righteousness by assuming the role of studying Torah, but then his previous decisions in banditry were thrown back on him, and so it's like, if you're on this path, what was that quote that you said?
It said you can't choose where you've come from, but you can choose where you're going from there.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
I like that.
I mean, we were just talking about their relationship as student-teacher kind of thing, and like dynamic within there, and we thought that was quite interesting, and also we've got two viewpoints there. Where's the other ones? Where we've got two points of view in that discussion. Where's the third? Where's the fourth? What's going on there? Where's the other points of view within that? So it was we didn't have much time just sort of analysing. So.
Great. Do you want to pass the mic down? And if somebody wants to add to it, they'll just either add to it or pass the mic on. Go for it.
Sure. I was just, in trying to answer that question, I had to go back to the original question about when does it become impure? I had not associated that with the manufacture. To me, it's the use of it. But then I thought, okay, what do they mean by impurity? So for me, my use of impurity would be using one of these sharp tools to hurt someone. But then if you're making a sword, it's designed to do that. So is your motive impure before you even manufacture it? So that was... I'm sorry, I couldn't answer the question about why he was upset.
Now we are in real rabbinic space. So if you ever wondered why the Talmud's so long, it's because we flow from it. We're going to keep going, actually. And as we go, if things pop into your head, you're going to put your hand up or pass the mic around. We're going to add our voices. So why is Reish Lakish so upset? Had this idea that his past is reminded to him. I'm really holding on to what Nina said about this idea of validating different paths and about there being a sense that these could be equally valuable insights, but instead Rabbi Yochanan sort of dunks him a little bit and says, you're lower than me, and that's a painful experience. Let's keep going. Maybe we'll have a reader. Who's got the microphone? Is your name Eloise? Elise, will you read for us?
Ultimately, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish.
That's Reish Lakish.
Okay, Shimon ben Lakish, Reish Lakish, died. Rabbi Yochanan was sorely pained over losing him. The rabbi said, "Who will go to calm Rabbi Yochanan's mind and comfort him over his loss?" They said, "Let Rabbi Elazar ben Pedat go, and his statements are sharp, i.e. he is clever and will be able to serve as a substitute for Reish Lakish." Rabbi Elazar ben Pedat went and sat before Rabbi Yochanan. With regards to every matter that Rabbi Yochanan would say, Rabbi Elazar ben Pedat would say to him, "There is a ruling which is taught in a baraita, and that supports your opinion." Rabbi Yochanan said to him, "Are you comparable to the son of Lakish?"
Okay, so Rabbi Yochanan is so upset by the experience, and so is Reish Lakish, but Reish Lakish dies of his sadness. And Rabbi Yochanan is distraught, and so his students choose someone to go and learn with him. What is the person they choose to go and learn with him like? I heard some words over here. What did you say? Right, so is he like Reish Lakish? That's the question. Let's keep going. Let's pass it round. This is what Rabbi Yochanan says. Let's just find a friend. Or Nia, you just keep going. Go on.
Alrighty. In my discussions with the son of Lakish, when I would state a matter, he would raise 24 difficulties against me in an attempt to disprove my claim. And I would answer him with 24 answers, and the halakha,
That means the law.
by itself, would become broadened and clarified. And yet, you say to me, there is a ruling which is taught in a baraita that supports your opinion. Do I not know that what I say is good? Being rebuted by Reish Lakish served a purpose. Your bringing proof to my statement does not. Rabbi Yohanan went around, rending his clothing, weeping and saying, Where are you, son of Lakish? Where are you, son of Lakish? Rabbi Yohanan screamed until his mind was taken from him. The rabbis prayed and requested for God to have mercy on him and take his soul, and Rabbi Yohanan died.
Okay. It's a real romantic tragedy. Like I really think you cannot escape the sense of sadness and loss and learning in this story. So why is Elazar ben Padat not like Reish Lakish? I'm going to just pass the mic, only just because then it means that everyone can hear you.
Because he's not offering the challenge, the intellectual challenge that Reish Lakish was offering.
Right, and for me, this is, in some ways, this is the ideal pairing, right? This is the archetypal rabbinic pairing, and that's why it's such a tragedy when it goes wrong. Because the culture of rabbinic Judaism is an inherent culture of challenge. It does not work when somebody sits in front of you and proves you right. That there is no sharpening of the tools, if you like. That knowledge in rabbinic Judaism is constructed through debate and discourse and public disagreement. And I want to introduce you to a couple of principles that, for me, embody the culture of the Beit Midrash. And I want you to be thinking as we talk, who's your Reish Lakish? Right, who is that person who, when you come up with an idea, doesn't tell you you're brilliant? Right, because we don't need that, right? Who is the person who gives you those refutations because they love you, right? Because they're deeply invested in you, so they're going to keep pushing you. Here are some principles of I think this is the ethos, if you like, of the Beit Midrash that for me are really valuable. The first is this notion of a machloket, an argument, and the value of argument. And for me, that comes alongside this notion of what we call a machloket l'shem shemayim, an argument that is for the sake of heaven, which is an argument that ultimately increases knowledge in the world. The rabbis taught that jealousy of sages increases knowledge. So when we see other people and when we compete and learn and think and share and debate, ultimately we discover more. They're not really interested in sitting at people's feet and telling them they're great. Instead, we have this idea of machloket l'shem shemayim, of adversary and debate for the sake of a higher purpose. And for me, one of my favorite principles of rabbinic literature is the idea of a teku. It's a disagreement that remains unsolved. So you'll be reading an argument for like 10 folios, for like 10 double-sided pages of Talmud, and then at the end it just says teku. And you're like, sorry, what? And it's something that I find really helpful is that in the Talmud, there are over 5,000 disagreements, and less than 50 of them are definitively resolved on the page. Which means that this argumentation, and I can't remember, what's your name? Sorry, over here, Kim. Kim demonstrated it so beautifully by bringing in halfway through this question of, well, is the object what's impure at all, or is it the action that's impure? That the nature of debate unfolds other questions, it grows, we learn in places we never expected to learn. We go on 3-day tangents and we come back. And what's more important and what's valuable is that culture of discourse, debate, argumentation, who it makes us. That's as important as getting to the answers. Because often the answers don't really exist, or at least if we take the scientific method, the answers are temporary. They only work until something works better. And so this idea of kind of absolute truth versus kind of progressive, where we get to as a progressive answer. You see this unfolding layers of Talmud. For me, there's a notion that actually what we have are arguments and answers that's satisfied in one moment in time. And then they become dissatisfying. And so we need a new layer, a new commentary. a new thing in the world that changes the context of what we knew. And so our answers have to change. And that's embodied for me in those layers of a page of Talmud. I wanted to finish with this text, which is also a Talmudic text from Tractate Ta'anit, which is a tractate that's about fasting. This has got nothing to do with fasting. But for me, it sums up the ethos of the Beit Midrash and the ethos of Rabbinic Judaism. Rabbi Chama, son of Rabbi Hanina, said, "What is the meaning of this quote in the book of Proverbs? Iron sharpens iron, so a man sharpens the countenance of his friend." This verse comes to tell you that just as with these iron implements, again, those metal implements like we had with Yochanan and Reish Lakish, one sharpens the other when they are rubbed against each other. So too, when Torah scholars study together, they sharpen one another in halakha. That's law. Rabba Bar Chana said, a very long way of saying, Rabba, the son of Chana. Why are matters of Torah compared to fire? Because in Jeremiah it says, "And not my word like fire," says God. Don't worry about that. To tell you, just as fire does not ignite in a lone stick of wood, but in a pile of kindling, so too matters of Torah are not retained and understood properly by a lone scholar who studies by himself, but by a group of sages. Iron sharpens iron, and fire doesn't take on a stick of wood, it requires kindling. If you want to understand something about this culture of rabbinic thought, this incredible gift that has allowed a community to move over 2,000 plus years from country to country, from culture to culture, to survive expulsion, to deal with genocide, to deal with some really difficult stuff, right? Being Jewish has not been particularly fun for quite a lot of Jewish history. You want to understand where that ability to adapt and learn and grow comes from? I think it's this. It's this sense of we figure it out together, that no one's alone, and that there's something about this embedded culture of learning, of debating, of understanding, and of striving without needing to know the final answer. For me, that creates an ethos that enables people to go out and do really cool stuff. So yeah, that would be my ethos pitch, and I wanted to end with this text. It's from the Talmud, and it's a statement the rabbis make: chavruta or matuta, study partnership or death. They understand that basically life depends, our ability to live together literally depends on the quality of our learning relationships and on being in deep and loving dialogue with one another.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Rabbi Deborah. We're going to open up for questions if anyone has, but I'm going to start off with my own question,
Great.
which is, who is your study partner?
I have two, because, I have two. Two classmates of mine, we studied together for like 5 years, and I can't do anything without having them think it through from different perspectives. I don't say or do anything really in my public life without studying it through with them first.
I love that. Nice. Any questions out there? Anyone has any? Elise?
What was the process like of deciding to become a rabbi? So you must get this all the time.
I knew for a long time that I wanted to work with people kind of through different stages of their lives and help them and all that stuff. But in the language of London schools, that meant becoming a doctor. So I went to medical school. And in my second year of medical school, I had this, I really hated dissection. But I had this moment of standing in front of one of our cadavers, sorry, it's a bit gross, standing in front of one of our cadavers and realizing that I was taking this exam where I was able to name like every single part of the body, but actually say nothing about what it meant to be a human. And that for me, there was this sense of, actually, that's the question that matters. That meaning and depth, and life is so fragile. It's not the length of life that gives it its value, it's the quality of it and how we live it. And I felt like, for me, that was the way I wanted to accompany people. And so took a little bit of a long time from there to get to where I am now. But for me now, you know, my week involves babies, old people, marriages, deaths, births, illness, all sorts of stuff, weddings, Samsung, like all sorts of things. And it feels like a lifelong chavruta. But yeah, it took a while.
Thank you. First of all, that was fascinating. I'm curious what your thoughts are about arguments that don't have answers in a world where it seems like that's a very triggering thing for people. Like we must agree or we must have a common solution. What are your thoughts on that?
So for me, this has become more important. That there's a day put together by one of the learning houses called Pardes that's called the International Day of Constructive Conflict, which I love as an idea. I think there's a difference between agreeing on values and agreeing on answers. I think it is really important to have a shared language of values and of principles that guide your decisions. I'm not sure there is always one answer, but I do think there is a question of what are we pursuing, like what's the end goal and what are we trying to protect and uphold. So if you're striving for the same shared values, I think it's okay to come at something from different places. Like actually it's probably quite healthy. That's really what rabbinic thought is about. I think the challenge is when we think it's about the arguments and not about the values. We don't have enough of a shared kind of, I think about it a lot actually in this country because we talk a lot about British values. But I think this question of actually what are our fundamental values? What are the principles that guide our arguments is probably more important than the arguments themselves, because you can't really have those arguments in good faith if you're not standing on the same ground.
Anyone else?
So I'm curious, what have you concluded are the shared values?
That's a really good question. So I can answer Jewishly, and I can explain how that impacts how I approach the world. For me, the sanctity of life, the idea that each person has infinite and unquestionable value is a non-starter. Like I can't have a conversation in an environment where someone's value as a human is conditional. There's no conditional value of someone's human life, of someone's life. That's a really challenging idea because it means we have to try and see value in humanity in people we fundamentally disagree with. But for me, that's my starting point in a kind of values-based discourse. Like theologically, I might say belief in one God, but actually lots of people access that differently, and I don't think theologically in this kind of space. But yeah, for me, it's the sanctity of life, the absolute and inviolable sanctity of life would be my starting point for shared values. Everything stems from that.
Any last questions before we wrap up? Right. Well, Rabbi Deborah will be hanging around if you have any other.
There was one more up there
you.
quickly.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Rabbi Deborah. That was enlightening. Thank you. Lots of food for thought. I feel like we're all now searching for that thought partner or thinking about who they might be or who they are. So thank you, Rabbi Deborah.